This is the Power of Genetics podcast, the podcast designed to help visionary practitioners build a more successful practice, transform more lives, and lead their patients into the future of personalized health. In each episode, I'll interview successful practitioners and leading thought leaders who will share their insights and expertise to help you prepare your practice for what lies ahead. I'm your host, Dr. Yael Jaffe, and now, let's get into today's episode. Good morning, Dr. Jeff Bland. It is an absolute delight to have you on our podcast, The Power of Genetics. I am pretty sure that I don't need to introduce you a great deal. So I'm going to keep it very short, but a great welcome to joining me here today.
Well, I just send back to you a good morning, Dr. Yael Jaffe. Thank you. What a treat to connect from South Africa to Bainbridge Island near Seattle in Washington State. So thank you.
From one ocean to another, as they say. Right. So for those of you, everyone knows Jeff, but for those of you who don't know Jeff that well, I'm just going to focus on three key things that Jeff has achieved, which is quite a task for me, just to bring some understanding to our conversation today. So the first most important thing, especially in my world, was that Jeff literally was the first person ever to write a book about nutrition and genetics. It was Genetic Nutritioneering. It was 1998. That is a full 5 years before the human genome. I don't even know how you conceived of the idea, never mind wrote the book. So it was the first book I ever read and was the first time I ever imagined this connection. So you pretty much were responsible for my entire career. Let's leave it at that. Take full responsibility there, Jeff. All right. But seriously, Jeff literally is the founder of functional medicine. Not only the Institute of Functional Medicine, but the concept, the field, the movement, this global, widespread understanding of how we could do so much better in the kind of allopathic medicine. Jeff is also the founder of PLMI, which is the Personal Lifestyle Medicine Institute, which is my favorite go-to. So even though I absolutely love IFM and functional medicine, I have become a PLMI devotee. And the reason being from my point of view is the functional medicine, I love functional medicine and it teaches us what to do now, but PLMI is about the future. And it's about what does the future of personalized medicine look like? I'm giving you my spiel and then we'll obviously get to you. Don't worry, you'll get lots of chance to. But I really, so I always travel to Jeff's conferences of PLMI because every time I go, I find inspiration. And in fact, the inspiration for my current company, 3x4, came at a PLMI conference in Seattle, where I started imagining this design, technology, functional performance, genetics space. So Personal Lifestyle Medicine Institute is really where we're trying to determine what the future of personalized medicine will look like. And then more recently, an extremely exciting organization, which is Big Bold Health. So maybe, Jeff, I know that is trying to reduce your CV to 3 points, and those are the three I've chosen. But is there anything you'd like to add? Because it's quite interesting how you've gone kind of functional, then future, and now Big Bold Health is actually reaching out to everyone. To absolutely everyone. So maybe just if you want to give us a little perspective on that.
Well, I don't think I could ever have a better personal press agent than you. That was just an amazing scenario and description of what I've been trying to do over the last 40 years. So just to kind of put a little capstone on what you have already very eloquently said, when I started off early on, and I was reminded of this when I was doing this week a series of conferences on the clinical laboratory in functional medicine, and we did 3 days of kind of overview. And I started off by just thinking, how did I get started in this whole field? And I recognized that in 1976, I had authored a book called Medical Applications of Clinical Nutrition. That was 1986. And in that book, it was broken into three sections. And the first section was on assessment. So I talked about the use of the laboratory in evaluating health from a different perspective, not just endpoint disease, not just talking about nutrition as a deficiency like beriberi scurvy and xerothymia rickets, but rather how do we assess functional nutrition and functional health status? And that was really where my mind got started on kind of functional. I was very fortunate after that book was published to have the chance to meet and spend some time with Dr. Linus Pauling. And then he was very gracious and asked if I would take a sabbatical and come and run one of his research labs at the Linus Pauling Institute of Science and Medicine in Palo Alto, California in 1981. So I spent 2 years, and that was kind of the, I would call my maturation years. I mean, I basically just changed my whole view of myself because of modeling after he and his wife, who were just remarkable thinkers, just people in the universe that were just special in the way they saw their commitment to what he called the reduction of human suffering. And so I gave up my tenured position at the faculty and then decided my life was going to be dedicated to try to teach practitioners, health practitioners, how to employ nutritional medicine in their practice. That was my whole business plan. And I had given up my tenure. And I had a young family, I had a mortgage, all those kind of things. And, I brought my parents up, got my dad to retire. He was an aerospace engineer and they were living up. And so my dad asked the pragmatic question. He said, well, this is all well and good, Jeff, but how are you going to make a living? And, that was a really interesting question, which I didn't have a really great answer for yet because I was just driven by the mission. And I figured that I could find a way to do that, to make a living. What that led into, without going through all the ups and downs, was eventually Susan, my wife, and I, after me doing a lot of traveling and a lot of lecturing, that was what I felt I could use as my tool to get both information in and information out. And so that was really the kind of the catalyst that started the company. She said, you always talk about these great people that you're meeting all around the world as you're traveling, and about how they really have a view of healthcare that's different from what we're doing right now in terms of disease care. Why don't we host a meeting and you can bring 30 or 40 of these people, these thought leaders from different disciplines in, and we'll just sit down and have a whiteboard discussion. So we did that in British Columbia, actually on Vancouver Island in Victoria, Canada. And that turned out to be just a remarkable thought leader conclave. It was just, when I think back, one of those magic things. Leo Gallen, Sid Baker, David Jones. There was the group of people were just remarkable, out-of-the-box thinkers. So that works. That was so effective and so energizing. We decided to do it a second year, and that would have been 1990. And out of that, I had this vision that what we really should be doing is starting to call ourselves functional medicine. And so I brought that concept back to the group, and they weren't really too excited about it, quite honestly, because they thought that term already was kind of pejorative and had a negative stigma in medicine because it was either considered to be psychosomatic medicine or geriatric disability medicine. And I said, well, that's true. That's the past way that it's been viewed. But I think that I'm looking at the medical literature now. Now we're getting functional cardiology, functional radiology, functional endocrinology. So maybe it's going to have a different vision going forward. Maybe we should capture that as our way of thinking. So I guess I was persuasive in getting that across. We then formalized the Institute for Functional Medicine. And when we did so, and this bears now on your very eloquent discussion, we decided that there were really two fundamental objectives of the Institute for Functional Medicine. Number one was to develop a teachable curriculum that would be able to be transferred to allow this to be executed upon, this systems biology concept in healthcare. We would develop a curriculum that you could actually teach and people could become competent in, and therefore they could do it rather than just think about it. So that, I believe, over the last 30 years, and IFM has just celebrated its 30th anniversary this year, I'm very proud to say. And I think it's done a pretty good job in performing on that objective of developing a teachable curriculum. The second objective, which I've come to learn was a more complicated objective. At the time, I didn't think so, but now I recognize I was a little naive. And that second objective was to make sure that we were always refreshing the curriculum and staying right at the leading edge. Hopefully not the bleeding edge, but the leading edge, so that we were pulling in new technology and new ideas and refreshing and revitalizing and never really staying with what I would call, as a former university professor, the yellowed notes that you probably could see some professors use, the same notes year after year after year, And I said, no, we should not be that kind of organization. We should be willing to completely turn over our curriculum with new information as it becomes available and is clinically applicable. Well, that objective, I think, still is a very important objective. But quite honestly, what we found over the years was more difficult to sustain. The reason for it is in our system in the United States, we have this group called the Council for Continuing Medical Education. that approves for Category 1 accreditation for medical practitioners' education. And they are very apprehensive to take on things that don't fall within certain standard practice and certain usual customary methodologies for proof of efficacy and blinded controlled studies and so forth. And so it's really hard to bring in new ideas that fulfill the criteria of the ACCME to be then accredited as Category 1. So over the years, what I came to feel, and I'm not sure if I was just the end of one of this, but I came to feel that we were losing some of that front edge, we were really good at bringing that other material into clinical understanding, but the ability to kind of fold in some of the new stuff was being left a little bit behind. So I recognized in 2013, maybe another organization was needed that wouldn't have the constraint of ACCME accreditation. We wouldn't seek out Category 1 accreditation, and we would be the bridge organization about bringing new ideas, and we'd be the incubator of ideas, and that was the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. And the reason I liked that term is that I thought that was all-encompassing. I don't think anybody would resist to the concept of personal, and no one would resist the concept of lifestyle. So I felt that, okay, this could be a meeting ground for people of all different disciplines, backgrounds, people in technology, people in biometrics, people in informatics, and we can have this as a meeting area to then spin off ideas that would ultimately then go into functional medicine. And quite honestly, I think that's proven to be true. I think over the last 8 years, we have incubated a number of ideas that are now refreshing IFM. So it's the right process. We have this laboratory over here called PLMI, and then we have this ACCME accredited education group called IFM. So that fulfilled those criteria. But there was one last part of this that for me was a missing link. And that is, in order to transform healthcare, which has always been my advocacy, and I know yours as well, we share this in common, is that you need a lot of consumer activity. There's never been a healthcare transformation that occurred because of health professionals alone, or health technology. It has to be connected to health consumers that find their values creation out of this concept of change and are engaged in promoting the change. And so my belief was, how do we connect to consumers in a way that they could redefine health away from the absence of disease into the presence of function? And the concept of functional medicine was a little esoteric, I thought, to take directly to the health consumer. So I was thinking, what would be a mechanism by which they would be the key to get them involved with this thinking? And I came to the conclusion, this was about 3 years ago now, that there are only 3 ways that the outside world directly interfaces with the inside world of our body, and kind of how our body samples what's going on outside. Those are the nervous system, our microbiome, which is constantly kind of communicating with the outside world, and then our immune system. And of those, I came to the conclusion that the one that changes the most quickly is our immune system. It has, because every 2 months, our immune system is completely regenerated. So the cells we have in our immune system 2 months from now are different than the cells we have today in terms of the individual cells. So I thought, well, here's a place where if we could teach people how to own their immune systems, that we could get them entering into the mastery of their own interface with their outside world, how it's translated to their inside function. So maybe this is the tool, this is the route of entry. So I was describing this concept to one of my dear colleagues that's worked with me for 25 years now, Trish Yuri. And, she's tolerant of me when I come back on Monday morning after weekend meetings and I'm downloading all this stuff, and I'm generally very effusive. And so she looked at me and said, so Jeff, this idea that you're talking about, it's a pretty bold idea. And she said, you're a big guy. So why don't you call this Big Bold Health? And so that formed this new company, Big Bold Health, around this concept, personalizing immunity. And so that's the last part of the cycle of my advocacy is putting this together with PLMI and with IFM.
I'm sure it's not the last. I just think it's the current. I'm sure there's more, Jeff. I have no doubt.
My wife know that.
I know. Don't tell Susan. Don't tell Susan. No. But also, I mean, Big Bold Health is quite young still. And I see it's growing exponentially, but I mean, there's many exciting things, I guess, that we're going to see big. So you still have some time to work on big Build Earth. We don't need anything new quite yet.
So. Yeah,
I hope so.
Cool.
So Jeff, thank you for that. I think that was amazing. So how you linked it is pretty much how I understood it, but I think you gave like a lot more detail and perspective to what that journey was and the why of the journey, which I'm always interested in. So, you know, what I'm always amazed by is when I meet persons like yourself or some of the other amazing practitioner, clinician scientists that I interview on the podcast, is that we all in the functional integrative world have this burning passion. I've never met a practitioner in this space who doesn't bring passion, empathy, compassion, enthusiasm. It's just, there's this incredible energy. If you've ever been to an IFM conference, you'll know what I'm talking about, or PLMI. There's just excitement and enthusiasm. And almost every single functional medicine, integrative medicine practitioner is driven by a why, by a vision and a purpose to change something. Often we hear it's their story. So they were ill, they developed some chronic disease, they didn't find success with allopathic medicine, they discovered functional medicine, they found you, they read one of your books, they went to a conference, and it changed their life. And then they want to bring that amazingness, those results and that work to their patients. But my question is, why? So this is the thing that I often think about is there's so many of these incredible practitioners out there that are battling to bring their message to their patients. And then there's stories like yourself. I've had a wonderful 2 decades where we've been able to take our message. We're just as passionate as everyone else, but we've been successful in taking our message and getting it out, whether it's to functional medicine practitioners, to PLMI, to Big Bold Health, to the consumer. What is the kind of advice that you would give practitioners who have the vision, have the purpose, have the passion, not scared of hard work? How do they get that message out into the open?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I have, like you, because of the travel that we both have done, in my case, over 6 million miles of travel over the last 40 years, I've had the chance to meet so many remarkable people like you. And what I've come to recognize is that there is no one path to self-enlightenment. There's no one path to success. There's no one path to service. There are many, many different routes to self-actualization, to fulfillment, and to personal prosperity. But I think what is important is for a person to find who they are and not try to be something that they're not. Some people are really big personalities and they like to be on the big marquee and the big board, and they do really well at that. And their egos don't get overtaken, and they use that platform to really broadcast their information effectively. That becomes kind of an amplifier of the success that this field can offer. And then there are other people who are much more comfortable in a private practice with just a smaller group of clients, but really doing quality work. And they see their life as success one patient at a time. And just the recounting of, like, you know, you might think of, thinking of Dr. Stone and the fact that she's delivered over 10,000 babies, you know, every one of those babies is for her a story that is part of her life process. She doesn't have to be the world's greatest obstetrician gynecologist, but she has done something really remarkable. And so I think that there are different paths to enlightenment and to a feeling of success, but the key is to find out where your comfort zone is. I mean, the person who is really good at being one-on-one with people, but not really that good at being a big personality on the big board, but they say they want to be that person, that can be frustrating. And the converse is true.
And the converse is true.
Who says, "Oh, I want to be the perfect doc for those or the perfect practitioner for a very small group of people, but I want it to be famous at the same time." You know, that can be that cannot work either. So I think there's so many paths, and really what I believe functional medicine provides, like you already said it very nicely, it's a tool to create a system to find ourselves as practitioners. We all came into this field for certain reasons, of wanting to help people, to be of service and so forth. So it's a tool that allows us to be more intimate in how we can actually interface in these chronic health problems that are often very complex. And we can either gain extraordinary feeling of fulfillment by individual patients one at a time, or we can do so by thinking, in my case, probably I've chosen the path to be on the big board and to try to excite and to inform many other people to do their good work every day in their interface with people. So to me, there are so many routes to personal success, and the functional medicine model, if you apply it to your life as function in your life, gives you a system to figure out how to navigate through that process.
I love what you're saying. And I'm going to share a little story about myself. So I started off, as you know, as a dietitian. And then later on went on and did genetics and obviously nutrigenomics. And I even opened a clinic and we had patients. And I always had this, it was almost like a sense of shame that I really didn't enjoy seeing patients. And for the longest time, I wouldn't tell anyone. I really, really didn't want to see patients. And in fact, seeing patients for me was more difficult than speaking on a platform to 1,000 people who I've never met before. And it was only last year, 2019, I thought it was like coming out, really. We are actually, it was so bad. It was saying like, I felt like Alcoholics Anonymous, my name's Yael Jaffe and I don't like seeing patients. And it was like, it was so funny. Everyone was like, we know you don't like seeing patients. I was like, really? Did you know that? It's like, everyone had figured it out, but I had never had the courage because I felt less of a functional practitioner, less by admitting that I really, really didn't like seeing patients. I didn't think I was very good at it. And I just could not get my energy into it. So it speaks so much to what you say, which is it's about, and you know that I love talking. And I love the sharing and I love the teaching. And it's only recently in the last couple of years where I've actually embraced that and said, you know what? I know what I'm not. And I know what I was never good at. And now I'm going to stop apologizing for it. And I'm actually just going to embrace what I love doing, which is talking to people like you and teaching and having a platform to share message. And it was such a sense of relief. And I think it does work both ways, as you said, which is about, go with your strengths where you feel most comfortable and don't try and be who you're not, which, as I say, only took me about 25 years to figure out.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was brilliant. Well, first of all, it's very courageous of you to share that. So I want to acknowledge that. But secondly, I think that there's no better teacher than personal experience when you're relating your personal experience. That's such a great motivating teaching tool. So we can all identify with that. And I share some of that in my own life. In my early career as a clinical biochemist and the head of a medical laboratory, I did quite a bit of patient consultation, which I enjoyed, but I always felt that my message was limited. And in fact, Dr. Linus Pauling, when I left my 2-year sabbatical with him, as I was packing up my office, which happened to be right next to his, which was kind of cool. And as I was going to the car to get in the car with my kids to drive back to Washington State from California, so he looks at me and he says, Jeff, it's been really great to have you here. I hope we'll keep in connection. So what are your intentions? And I said, well, I'm going back to my professorship and, I've got my research program set up back there and so forth and so on. And he said, well, that's wonderful. And then he looked at me and says, so do you think your classroom is big enough? That was the last.
Wow.
Yeah. I had the 1,200 miles to drive back to.
Think about that.
And it was always in my mind as to what he was really saying. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a wise man, isn't it?
Yeah,
wow, that's amazing. I love that. I'm going to think about that now. I'm going to think about that. Jeff, this is the Power of Genetics podcast. So I would be remiss if we didn't touch on genetics. And as you have been in this journey even longer than I have, I am going to ask for your opinion on where do you think genetics really sits or plays in this future of medicine, whether it's personalized lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, but really the next decade as we understand it of medicine, where do you think genetics is going to sit?
Well, I think you've been a leader, quite honestly, in bringing that question to light and to adding the robust texture to that question that allows us to see a frame shift that occurred at about the turn of the century, this last century, is irreversibly changing everything that we think about life as human beings on the planet. And I don't think most people fully understand yet the implications of deciphering the human genome and the social implications of that. So let me just give a little color, because you've been doing this very beautifully as well. If you think about things that change culture globally, certainly in the Western world, but I would say impacting all of the world culture, ideas within the last few centuries that would fulfill that big idea concept. The one that a lot of people would land on as science concepts would be evolution, right? Darwinian natural selection, the Darwin concept, because it impacts every field, every component of biological life sciences. But it's done much more than that, if you think about it, because it has created an altered view of our social structure, some of which is good, some of which is probably not so good, because we now have survival of the fittest. We now have people social Darwinizing, right? So we have taken this concept into the social language. People that are not scientists at all, or probably don't even understand Darwin's concepts, actually have been living through a principle that they think is Darwinistic, which is this competition, competitiveness, I survive at your expense type of, that's how we evolve. You got to fight your battles. And so that social Darwinism has then caused a texture to our culture, some of which, by the way, I would say has been good, but some of it which has not been so good in terms of the way we as people interact. So if we asked what is the great social transformative potential of genetics, of deciphering the human genome, you could look at it in two very different polarity ways. One way is you could say, well, this is going to tell us why some people are better than others. That would be one way of looking at it, right?
Yeah.
We will find the genes that will allow you to justify why you are better than somebody else because of your genes. Or, and this is what I think will be the dominant theme, we can say what we're exploring is the greatness that's potential in every human being within their genome if they understand it and they can maximize its benefit. Now, those two things both come out of the same discoveries.
Yeah.
That is understanding something about our book of life. But it's how we then interpret and incorporate those concepts into our daily lives, both not only in our medicines and health, but into our social thinking. How we think of another person, how we think about race and class and culture, and I mean, all sorts of things that derive out of that. And I believe that this can free us up. I think this can free us up from the concept of race. It can free us up from the concept of ethnic bias. It can free us up to recognize that we're all in this system together with our 23 chapters represented by our chromosomes. And that within those chapters are extraordinary adventure stories for every human being if we can just fully activate them and find ways to promote their goodness. So I'm fairly, when people talk about bad genes and good genes, I don't think they're bad and good genes. I think they're agnostic.
No, agreed.
Well, I know you do because you're to this. But that's, to me, what we're really going through as it relates to genetics. So I think a lot of people, come down to think of this in kind of very rude, materialistic ways of, well, did you have your genes tested? Well, the genes tested is just an exploration into the understanding of your pluripotential. How much you could be if you fully were able to actuate all that goodness that resides in your book of life. So that's kind of my take on where we're going. And we're still early on to understand how to do this. And then you can say, well, how does that relate to the evolution of medicine? Well, this precision cancer therapy thing now, where we're starting to get immune therapies based on different genotypes and then you can even go to say, well, how are we going to introduce and incorporate CRISPR technologies and gene editing into our future? I don't know. All I know is all these things are opening up a new discussion that's more than just the base pairs in DNA. It has a huge implication in terms of how we see ourselves in combination with other people, with our culture, our society. And the more we can understand that and incorporate that magic into our belief system, the better, I think, as a culture we're going to be.
Oh, I love that. And that speaks so much to my philosophy around genetics. I mean, I know you know that, but I often talk about this idea that, what does genetics do? It gives us insight. It gives us self-knowledge. It gives us the ability to know who we are and how we respond to the world around us. And, in its simplistic way that genetics is seen, they think, oh, blonde hair, blue eyes, I'm tall, I'm a fast runner. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, how do I exist in this world? How do I respond to the world, the people, nature, the air, the water, relationships, trauma, stress, all of that is partly coming from our DNA, from our genetics. And if I can understand that about myself, which is self-awareness, self-knowledge, I can make so many better decisions to be able to live, as you say, the best potential of my life, and whatever that is, because quality of life and best is different for every single individual. So I really, really do agree. It's not about who we are against someone else, but who we are in the world as achieving our greatest potential. And I think when that becomes a journey, which is how we like to talk about genetics, which is a journey, it is a journey of exploration. Who am I? I learn about myself. As we learn more about us, genetics, we learn more about ourselves. How does that change the decisions we make about ourselves? And we just want to make better decisions, is what it comes down to. Like, we want to make better decisions for ourselves, our families, the environment, the planet. And I think genetics is just not the only, but certainly one of the most beautiful tools to kind of help us on that journey. So, I mean, what you say, I know I'm saying the same thing as you are, but it's so lovely to hear the way you put it. I really appreciate that.
Well, I had a really profound experience early in my career when I was the lab director for Dr. Leo Bowles in Seattle for his lab. Really the first kind of nutrition medical doctor that I'd ever met. He had quite a robust practice. This is back in the 70s in Washington State. And so he asked me to do a consult for this mother and her son. The son had trisomy 21. He had Down syndrome. And so I was, at that point in my development as a human being, I was thinking, oh, poor Down syndrome children. They have this genetic abnormality that really limits their ability to be functional. And so I took into this discussion with the mother and her son that perception that it was really a bias, right? That already had kind of a mindset. But what I recognized in that visit and then subsequent visits with her and the discussion with her son is that she was extraordinarily happy and excited for her son, and he was an extraordinarily happy and wonderful young boy. And yes, he was different, no question about it. But she was worried about, having him as healthy as possible, which we were working on. But he had a joyous sense of the world that was infective. I mean, I felt it. And his mother loved him dearly, and she didn't see him impaired whatsoever. She saw him as unique. And that was a very powerful teaching tool for me, because I came away recognizing, no, hold it. It was I that came into this exam room with the stigma of him being impaired. And it was her teaching and his teaching of me that no, he was different and unique, but he was not impaired. He was fully functional for what he was, and he loved it. And he was joyous, and he was creating goodness for others. So I think that this is some of these things that we perceive of are products of our own lack of understanding.
and so social bias, absolutely.
Yeah, and as we get into understanding our genetic, one of the actual founders of functional medicine that hasn't gotten the attention that probably he deserves was a professor of informatics from MIT, and Wayne Matson was his name. And I had met Wayne in my work with the Institute for the Achievement of Human Potential that had worked with 500,000 brain-injured children. This is a Philadelphia institute. And he was having a child that had been brain-injured in birth, he and his wife. He got involved, and I was a member of their scientific advisory board as well, and we collaborated, and we watched these kids that were seriously impaired over the course of their intervention with the treatment program that this institute had offered, which is nutrition and exercise and patterning. And these kids became stars. Literally, these infants that we saw, some of who were suggested to be institutionalized to the parents, I was there long enough to see that at the time they were 10, 11, 12 years of age, they were not just performing okay, they were performing unbelievably. I mean, they were doing complex gymnastics, they were playing musical instruments at high level by memory. They were doing Shakespeare in Old English.
Wow.
I just was blown away. And so, so he became a member of our initial group of people in looking at how we would take these concepts into healthcare, into medicine, and in the discussions with functional medicine. And what he brought to me and the group, that was a fundamental principle in the starting of functional medicine. He said, if you look at any individual class of people, like you could say a disease, type 2 diabetics, he said, within that class of individuals that we would categorize with a word, we would call them, we would label them. If you actually look at the variegation, there's more difference among that group than there are among people that don't share that disease nomenclature. And so these words we have put to people, like a disease, that's why I wrote the book, The Disease Delusion, because these become stigmatizing terms that don't really lead to understanding. They lead to separation and sometimes bigotry. So
that's what we want to get away from. 100%. Yeah. Well, I think that is a great end. I appreciate that you've given me even more of your time than I'd asked for. I can talk for hours with you, Jeff, and often do. But I really enjoyed our discussion today. I think it's a little bit different from what we normally talk about. So I truly appreciate that. I think there's some things that I'd like to think about and take away from it. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining me, and looking forward to our next PLMI conference.
Thanks a million. Keep up the great work. You're such a star and such a leader. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Genetics podcast, brought to you by 3x4 Genetics. For more episodes, please visit 3x4genetics.com/podcast. And if you are a licensed health practitioner who would like to apply to join our network of over 1,000 like-minded visionary practitioners, please visit 3x4genetics.com/apply.